The desert showed no mercy. And for Janelle Miles, stranded on her parched homestead, mercy was a luxury she couldn't afford. She expected to find only snakes and scorched rock in the devil's anvil. She did not expect to find a man. He was dying, clad in the beads and leather of the local Red Rock tribe, a bullet in his side. Dragging him to safety was a death sentence from the settlers in Prospect Creek, but leaving him was an act of cruelty she couldn't commit. She didn't know his name, his crime, or his people, and she certainly didn't know she was dragging the future of an entire nation across the burning sand. The sun over the Arizona Territory was a judgment, a white-hot eye that bleached the very soul of the land. Janelle Miles called this place the Devil's Anvil, a basin of cracked alkali flats and shimmering heat that stretched between her homestead and the distant, cool blue line of the Dragoon Mountains. She was out here, miles from the meager shade of her sodden timber cabin, checking the wire traps she'd set for jackrabbits. It was a fool's errand, mostly. The land was in a drought so deep the coyotes had stopped howling. Janelle was a woman carved from the same hard material as the landscape. Her husband, Peter, had died 2 years prior, not from a bullet or a bandit, but from a rattlesnake bite. He'd lasted 3 agonizing days. Janelle had tried every poultice, every prayer. Nothing worked. Now she was alone, too stubborn to sell the land to men like Augustus Dryden in Prospect Creek, and too broke to leave it. She was an outcast by choice, a pariah by circumstance. The townsfolk thought her half mad for staying. She was resetting a snare near a cluster of heat-blasted prickly pear when she saw the buzzard. Just one, circling low. Not a kill, then. Not yet. Curiosity, a dangerous instinct in the anvil, pulled her forward. She crested a low, gravelly rise and stopped. It wasn't a coyote, it was a man. He was Red Rock, no doubt about it. His black hair was matted with blood and sand. He wore beaded leggings and a torn leather tunic. He lay face down, one arm flung out, as if reaching for a canteen that lay split open inches from his hand. She nudged him with her boot. A low groan, so faint it was nearly stolen by the wind. He was alive. Janelle felt a cold spike of fear. The tension between the settlers in Prospect Creek and the Red Rock tribe was a taut wire. A month ago, a freight wagon had been raided. The blame fell on the tribe. Bringing this man back to her cabin was not just a risk, it was an invitation for ruin. If the townsfolk found out, they'd call her a traitor and burn her out. If his people found him with her, they might assume she was the one who shot him. He groaned again, a sound of pure agony. He had a hole in his side, high on the ribs. It was a bullet wound, black with dried blood and flies. He was dying of the wound, but he was dying faster of the sun. She looked up at the merciless sky, then back at the man. She thought of Peter, his skin turning grey, begging for water. She had been helpless then. "Damn it all," she whispered. The words came out in a puff of dust. She unhooked her own canteen from her belt. It was only half full. She knelt, rolling the warrior onto his back. His face was surprisingly young, perhaps 25, strong features, now slack with pain. She uncorked the canteen and dripped a few precious drops onto his cracked lips. His eyes fluttered, but they were unseeing. She stood and scanned the horizon. Nothing. Just the endless, vibrating heat. She couldn't leave him. That was the simple, terrible truth. The part of her that had survived Peter's death was too hard to be cruel. She was a strong woman, but he was a heavy man. She tried lifting him. Impossible. She'd have to drag him. It was over 2 miles back to her cabin, across the worst of the anvil. She grabbed the collar of his tunic. His skin was burning, radiating heat like a stove. She looped her arms under his, locked her hands across his chest, and leaned back, digging her worn boots into the gravel. He was a dead weight. The first step was a gasp. The second was a curse. She began to pull, one agonizing footfall at a time. She was dragging a dying warrior across the burning sand, and the only thought in her head was that she was probably dragging herself to her own grave. The journey back was a private hell. The sun climbed from unforgiving to malicious. The sand and gravel were so hot they cooked the soles of her boots. Janelle was tough, but this was a different kind of endurance. It wasn't the sharp pain of a broken bone. It was the slow, abrasive pain of being worn down to nothing. She'd fashioned a makeshift travois from her rifle and a piece of canvas she carried for game. But the rifle stock snagged on every rock, and the warrior's weight threatened to snap the wood. After half a mile, the canvas tore. The plan failed. It was back to dragging. She wrapped her hands in strips of cloth, torn from her apron to keep the skin from ripping off. His body left a shallow, grim trench in the desert floor. Every 20 yards, she had to stop, her lungs burning, her vision swimming with black spots. The landscape shimmered, the mountains seeming to float on a lake of pure heat. The warrior was delirious. He muttered in a language she didn't understand, the words guttural and desperate. But a few words filtered through in broken English. Water. Betray. And a name, repeated like a feverish prayer. Malachi. Malachi. Shut up, Janelle panted, more to herself than to him. Save your breath, or don't. Just don't die on me yet. She felt a perverse sense of duty. She had committed to this foolishness, and she would see it through. If he died, he would die in the shade, not cooked on the anvil like an animal. Halfway there, a shadow crossed them. She froze, her heart seizing. She looked up, expecting to see the silhouettes of riders on the ridge. It was just the buzzard, lower now, impatient. Not yet, you feathered bastard, she spat. She gave the warrior another sip of water and took one for herself. The tepid metallic taste was the only thing keeping her upright. His skin felt like paper, his breathing shallow. The wound in his side was ugly, a dark, puckered thing that smelled of infection. As she neared her homestead, her knees began to buckle. Her cabin was built low, dug into a slight rise, with a small corral and a burned-out patch of land that had once been her husband's hopeful garden. It was a fortress of solitude. The last 100 yards were the worst. She was moving on pure, spiteful will. She dragged him over the threshold and collapsed onto the dirt floor, gasping. The relative cool of the cabin was a shock. For a full minute, she just lay there, the warrior, an unmoving lump beside her. She forced herself up. All this way, not for nothing. She dragged him onto her own narrow cot, the ropes groaning in protest. First, water. She poured a small cup and gently raised his head, forcing the water past his lips. He coughed, sputtered, but swallowed. Then, the wound. She lit the stove, not for heat, but to boil water. She pulled her meager medicine box from under the cot. It held carbolic acid she'd bought in town, some clean rags and a bottle of whiskey. She also had her own remedies, a jar of dried sage and a poultice made from prickly pear pads, which Peter had sworn by for drawing out infection. She cut away his tunic. The bullet was still in there, lodged against a rib. She wasn't a surgeon. She couldn't dig it out. She could only clean it. She poured the whiskey over the wound. The warrior arched off the cot with a sound that was half scream, half hiss. His eyes snapped open, blazing with a moment of lucid fury before rolling back into his head. "Sorry," she muttered, her hands shaking. but that's the only way. She cleaned the wound as best she could with the carbolic, packed it with the sage and pear poultice, and bound it tightly with clean rags. His fever was high, a dangerous, dry heat. She spent the rest of the day and into the night bathing his face with a wet cloth, forcing water and a thin broth of salted rabbit down his throat. She sat in her rocking chair, her shotgun across her lap, watching him. He was a threat, a secret that could destroy her. But as he lay there, helpless, he was also just a man. She had dragged him from the Ann Monitor, and now, for better or worse, he was her responsibility. By the third morning, the warrior's fever had not broken. It raged. The poultice was drawing the poison, but the infection was deep. Janelle knew she was beaten. She was out of carbolic acid, and the sage was running low. If he was going to have any chance, he needed real medicine. He needed quinine. That meant a ride to Prospect Creek. She checked the man. He was unconscious, his breathing ragged. She left a full canteen by the cot, barred the door from the outside, and saddled her weary mare, Bess. The ride to town was 8 miles, and she hated every one of them. Prospect Creek was a typical boom and bust town, mostly bust. It was a single dusty street, lined with false front buildings, 3 saloons, a general store, and the office of Mr. Augustus Dryden, who owned the bank, the land office, and half the souls in town. Janelle tied Bess to the hitching post outside the general store, acutely aware of the eyes on her. The women of the town, in their faded calico, stared from behind curtains. The men lounging on the boardwalk, unemployed miners and drifters, watched her with a mixture of pity and suspicion. The widow of the anvil. She entered the store, the bell jangling. Mr. Henderson, the proprietor, was weighing beans. "Mrs. Miles," he said, not unkindly. "Long time. You look parched. I need quinine, Mr. Henderson, and a bottle of your strongest carbolic." Henderson raised an eyebrow. "Quinine? That's for fever. You ailing?" "Just a precaution," Janelle said flatly. "And a box of 44 cartridges." As Henderson gathered the items, the bell jangled again. The air in the store changed. It grew colder. Augustus Dryden stepped inside, followed by a man Janelle didn't recognize. Dryden was immaculate in a dark suit and bowler hat, a stark contrast to the dust. He was a soft-spoken man, which made him all the more terrifying. "Mrs. Miles," he said, smiling. "A pleasure. We so rarely see you in civilization." "Mr. Dryden." She kept her voice flat. "I was just visiting your sector, in fact," he said, inspecting a coiled rope. "Thinking of you. That land of yours. It's a burden. The drought has hit it hard. I imagine that spring of yours is nearly dry." Janelle's heart tightened. Her small hidden spring was the only reason her homestead was viable. "It provides. For now," Dryden mused. He gestured to the man beside him. This man was different. He was tall, with the high cheekbones and skin of the Red Rock tribe, but he was dressed like a settler. Denim trousers, a store-bought shirt, and a cavalry scout's jacket. His eyes were flat and cold. "This is Mr. Malachi Benning," Dryden said. "He's a liaison, helping us maintain friendly relations with the tribe. He's looking for one of his lost lambs, a young warrior, prone to trouble." Janelle's blood turned to ice. Malachi, the name the warrior had muttered. Malachi Benning looked at her. His gaze was sharp, analytical. "You live near the anvil, yes?" he asked. His English was perfect, unaccented. "I keep to myself," Janelle said, her hand resting on the counter, near her purse. "A wise policy," Malachi said. "But the desert is dangerous. You see or hear anything. A stray. You send word to Sheriff Brody. There are dangerous men out there." men who would defy their own chief. Dryden paid for a cigar, his eyes twinkling with an unspoken meaning. Indeed, the anvil is no place for a woman alone. My offer still stands, Janelle. $500 for the deed. Take the money and go back east, before the land, or something else, swallows you whole. Janelle grabbed her package from Henderson, paid with the last of her egg money, and turned to Dryden. My land is not for sale, Mr. Dryden. Not now, not ever. She walked out, feeling Malachi's eyes on her back. The ride home was fast. She wasn't just racing a fever anymore. She was racing the man who had caused it. She arrived back at the cabin in a cloud of dust, half expecting to find it burning. But it was silent. Inside, the warrior was exactly as she'd left him, though his skin seemed grayer. She administered the quinine, forcing the bitter powder mixed with water down his throat. For 2 more days the battle raged. Janelle barely slept. She sat by the cot, shotgun in hand, listening to the wind, jumping at the cry of every hawk. She was a prisoner in her own home, hostage to a man she didn't know, and a secret she didn't understand. On the 3rd night after the town visit, the fever broke. She dozed off in the chair and woke to a sound. A click. The warrior was awake. He was holding her hunting knife, which she'd foolishly left on the table. He was sitting up, his eyes clear and intelligent for the first time. But they were filled with cold, deep hatred. He was weak, but the intent was clear. "Put it down," Janelle said, slowly raising her shotgun. They stared at each other, a standoff between patient and nurse. He looked at the shotgun, then at her. He spoke, his voice a dry rasp. "Where am I?" "My home," she said. "You're safe, for now. I'm the one who pulled you out of the anvil." His eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because I was there," she said, impatient. "Now put the knife down. I used my last dollar on quinine for you. It would be a shame to waste a bullet on you now." He studied her face, searching for something. Deceit, perhaps. He found only exhaustion. Slowly, grimacing in pain, he placed the knife on the table. He sagged back against the wall, his burst of strength gone. "Who shot you?" she asked. He was silent. He looked at his bandaged side, his expression unreadable. "Water," he croaked. She brought him the canteen. He drank deeply, greedily. When he finished, he looked at her again. "What is your name?" he asked. "Janelle Miles. And yours?" He hesitated. "Gideon," he said. It was a Western name, a white name. She knew it wasn't his true one, but it was what he was offering. "Gideon," she repeated. "Well, Gideon, you've brought a hell of a lot of trouble to my door." The recovery was slow. For the next week, they lived in a strange, silent truce. He did not speak of the ambush. She did not speak of the men in town. He was fiercely private, and she respected it. A bond formed, not in words but in actions. He would watch her, his gaze intense. He watched her mend her clothes, clean her rifle, portion out their meager rations. One day, he pointed to the small, withered garden patch outside the window. "Water is life," he said. "My spring is weak," she replied. He shook his head. He used a piece of charcoal from the stove to draw in the dirt floor. He drew her spring, then drew a new, narrower channel, using the contours of the land, a channel that would reduce evaporation and increase flow. It was a simple, brilliant adjustment she had never considered. He was a warrior, but he understood the land in a way her husband, Peter, a carpenter from Ohio, never had. He also began to carve. He had a small knife in his boot she hadn't found. He took a piece of scrap wood and began to work it. His hands were steady, precise. One evening, He was clutching the small turquoise amulet around his neck. She had seen it when she cleaned him. It was a beautiful piece, carved like an arrowhead, but with a unique starburst pattern. "That's beautiful," she said, nodding to it. His hand closed around it. "It is a promise," he said. He wouldn't elaborate. The silence between them was no longer hostile. It was shared. He was healing. His strength was returning. He would walk the small cabin, testing his legs, his eyes always on the horizon. Janelle felt a strange new emotion. For 2 years, she had been utterly alone. Now this man, this enemy, was a presence. His quiet strength was a comfort. She had saved his life, and in doing so, had broken the suffocating spell of her own isolation. But the peace was fragile, and she knew it. The men in town were not going to forget about her land, and Malachi was not going to forget about Gideon. The attack came just after dusk, a week after her trip to town. Gideon was on his feet, stronger now, his wound healing cleanly. He was standing by the window, staring out at the purple twilight, when his head snapped to the side. "Horses," he said, his voice a low growl. 3, maybe 4, riding hard. Janelle's heart hammered. "My mare is in the corral. They'll see her." "They are not here for the horse," Gideon said. He moved to the cot and pulled his mended tunic on. The quiet patient was gone. In his place was a warrior. "Bar the door," he commanded. She slammed the heavy wooden bar into place. She grabbed her shotgun and handed Gideon her husband's .44 rifle. He checked the action, his movements economical and swift. "Stay away from the window," he said. "They will shoot at the light." He blew out the single kerosene lamp, plunging the cabin into near darkness. A voice called out, rough and slurring. "Janelle Miles, we know you're in there. Mr. Dryden wants a word." Janelle's hands were slick with sweat. "They're Dryden's men." "They are Malachi's dogs," Gideon corrected her. "Dryden's paying," the voice yelled again. "He's upping his offer. Your last chance. Come on out, or we burn you out." Janelle moved to the firing slit she'd built into the west wall. "Go to hell!" A shot rang out, the bullet thudding into the thick sod wall. Then another, this one shattering the single glass window. "This is not a parley," Gideon whispered. He moved to the dark side of the cabin. "They will try the back, the corral, to light the fire." "My mare!" Janelle whispered in panic. "The horse is a distraction. They want us." The shooting became a volley, bullets peppering the walls. It was designed to frighten, to pin them down. Then Janelle heard it, a scraping sound at the back of the cabin. Gideon put a finger to his lips. He was completely calm, his eyes adapted to the dark. He pointed to the front door, then at her. "Keep them busy." She fired the shotgun through the window, the blast deafening in the small space. "Get off my land." The men outside laughed. "She's got spirit." While they were distracted, Gideon moved to the back wall. He'd noticed a loose plank near the floor earlier in the week, one Peter had never fixed. With his knife, he silently worked it free. He slipped through the opening like a snake, disappearing into the night. Janelle's heart was in her throat. She was alone. She reloaded the shotgun. She heard a shout from outside, a cry of, "He's lighting the barn!" She saw the orange flicker. They were setting her small, empty barn ablaze. The bastards! Then, from the darkness near the fire, came a new sound, a low, wet scream. It was cut off instantly. The shooting at the front stopped. "Frank?" one of the men called out, his voice suddenly nervous. "Frank, you light it?" Silence. "Where is he?" another man yelled. Janelle saw a shadow detach itself from the burning barn. It was Gideon. He was holding a rifle she didn't recognize, one he must have taken. "He's out!" a man yelled in panic. Gideon fired. A man screamed and fell from his horse. The third man, the one who had been shouting, spurred his horse in a panic, firing wildly back at the cabin. Gideon took aim, his form illuminated by the fire, and fired the rifle. The shot was clean. The man slumped over his saddle, and the horse bolted into the night, carrying a dead man. It was over in 2 minutes. Gideon walked back to the cabin, not through the hole, but through the front door, unbarring it. He was breathing hard, but his eyes were clear. He tossed the new rifle onto the cot. "They're gone," he said. Janelle ran outside. The barn was an inferno. Her mare, terrified, was kicking at the corral. The fire was spreading to the dry grass. "The well!" she yelled. For the next hour, they were not warrior and settler. They were just two people fighting a fire. They used wet blankets and buckets from the spring-fed well, beating back the flames, choking on the smoke. Finally, they contained it, saving the cabin and the corral. They collapsed by the well, covered in soot, chests heaving. Josephina looked at the smouldering ruins of her barn. It was all she had left of Peter's work. Gideon came over. He was looking at the body of the man he'd killed with his knife. He nudged the man's vest over with his boot. Pinned to it was a small tin star, a deputy's badge from the land office, Dryden's private law. He was not a good man, Gideon said, as if it were the only comfort he could offer. Janelle looked at him, the man who moved like a phantom, who killed with such cold precision. "Who are you, Gideon?" Gideon stared at the dead man for a long time before turning to face her. The firelight from the ruined barn cast dancing, harsh shadows across his face. "They will return," he said, his voice flat. "That was not a warning. That was a test. They know I am here, and they know you will not break." "We have to leave," Janelle said, her voice shaking, the adrenaline fading and leaving a cold dread. "We can go to the dragoons. I can't fight them all." "Running will not save us," Gideon said. He walked to the cabin and retrieved the turquoise amulet from inside, where he'd hidden it. He held it up in the moonlight. "This is what they want." I thought they wanted my spring, my land. Dryden wants your land. Malachi wants this." He finally looked at her, his guard completely down for the first time. The exhaustion, the pain, and the weight of his secret were all visible. "My name is not Gideon," he said quietly. "That is the name I use with your people. My name is Tarza, and I am the son of Calin, the chief of the Red Rock people." Janelle stared, her mind struggling to connect the delirious man in the sand with the reality standing before her. "The man you saw in town," Tarza continued, "Malachi Benning. He is my blood, my father's nephew, my cousin." He shot you? Your own family?" Tarza's face hardened. "My father is old. He must soon choose a successor. The tribe is divided. There are those like me who believe we must keep to the old ways, to the land that is our mother. Then there are those, like Malachi, who see the new world. They see the railroads, the rifles, the money." He paced, the story pouring out of him now. "Malachi argues that our only path to survival is to become like the white man, to sell the rights to our mountains, to let them dig for the yellow rock. He has been in council with Augustus Dryden for months. Dryden wants the mountains. Malachi wants to be the chief who sells them. And your father?" "My father chose me," Tarza said. He held up the amulet. "This is the Eye of Calin. It is the symbol of the successor. He gave it to me 3 weeks ago, at the new moon. Malachi, his heart is black with jealousy. He and his followers, they ambushed me on my way back from the high peaks. They shot me and left me for the buzzards, so they could tell the tribe I was missing, presumed dead. Then Malachi would be the only choice left. Janelle suddenly understood. The delirium. Malachi. Betray. Without this, Taza said, holding the turquoise, Malachi cannot be named successor. Even if I am dead, he cannot claim the leadership without the symbol. He knew I had it. He must have tracked me, lost my trail in the anvil, and assumed I'd died. But when Dryden's men failed to run you off, he suspected. He thought you might have found me, or found this. Janelle sagged against the corral post. She had stepped into the middle of a war for a throne. She hadn't just saved a warrior, she had saved the one man holding back the tide of greed that Augustus Dryden was pushing. They attacked tonight to get you out, Taza said, to search this cabin, this land, to find me or the eye. They'll be back, Janelle whispered, a cold sickness filling her. Dryden won't give up, and Malachi will come himself, Taza finished. He will come with Dryden's guns, and he will bring his own warriors, those loyal to him. He will paint it as revenge, as justice for the thieves who allied with a settler. He will wipe this place from the earth to hide his secret. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a new, heavy respect. You did not just save my life, Janelle Miles. You saved the life of my people. The mountains, the water, everything. And now, I have put a target on your back. We fight then, Janelle said. The fear was still there, but it was being burned away by a cold, hard anger. This was her land. They had burned her barn. They had tried to kill her. You are not the only one with a right to this land. Peter died for it. I'm not running. Taza nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. Then we do not run. We prepare. They will come with the dawn. Dawn came not with a song, but with a threat. The sky to the east bruised with a sick, yellow light. The air was still, heavy. Taza and Janelle had worked through the night. They'd brought the mare inside the cabin, barricaded the windows with the few pieces of furniture they had, and cleaned their weapons. They had the shotgun, the .44 rifle, and the rifle Taza had taken from the attacker. They had perhaps 50 rounds between them. They will not expect a fight, Taza said. He was inspecting her husband's rifle. They will expect a woman, terrified. They'll get one, Janelle muttered, checking the shotgun shells. But she's armed. Taza stationed himself at the shattered window, using the heavy oak table as a breastwork. Janelle took the firing slit on the opposite wall. From there, she could cover the approach from the ridge. They didn't have to wait long. They appeared as silhouettes against the rising sun. A dozen riders. Maybe more. They moved slowly, cautiously, fanning out to surround the small cabin. Janelle felt her stomach drop. This wasn't a rabble. This was an organized force. She saw Augustus Dryden at the back, mounted on a fine black stallion. And at the front, Malachi Benning. He was no longer dressed as a scout. He was in the full leather and beads of a Red Rock warrior, his face painted for war. Beside him rode several of his own men, but the bulk of the force was made of Dryden's hired guns. They stopped just outside rifle range. "Janelle Miles!" Dryden's voice boomed, amplified by the morning quiet. "A final offer. Hand over the fugitive, Taza, and you will be escorted, unharmed, to the train station in Tucson. Refuse, and you will be charged with harboring a murderer." "He lies," Taza said, not taking his eye from the sight. "What murder?" Janelle yelled back. "The men you killed," Dryden shouted. "My deputies! They were serving a legal warrant." "They were arsonists and thugs!" Janelle screamed, her voice cracking. Malachi rode forward, his horse prancing nervously. His eyes were fixed on the cabin. "Taza!" he yelled, in his own language first, then in English. "Cousin! Show yourself! Your fight is with me, not with this woman. Let her go, and I will give you a warrior's death." Tarza stepped into the open doorway, his rifle held loosely at his side. He looked magnificent, his wounds and the soot from the fire only adding to his authority. "Malachi," Tarza's voice was a roar. "You are a snake. You wear the paint of our people, but you ride with the man who would poison our water and strip our mountains. You are no blood of mine." This accusation, spoken for all to hear, had an effect. The Red Rock warriors with Malachi shifted, looking at each other, then at Dryden. Dryden saw the hesitation and acted. "He's a liar and a traitor to his own chief. Take them. I want him alive, and her. I don't care." He raised his hand. The hired guns leveled their rifles. This was it. It was hopeless. 12 guns against 2. "Stay inside, Janelle," Tarza said, stepping back into the shadow of the doorway. "Aim for the men with the badges. They are the ones Dryden pays." Janelle rested the barrel of the shotgun on the slit, her hand so steady it frightened her. She was no longer afraid. She was just angry. The world went silent. Dryden's hand was in the air, and from the ridge behind them, a new sound. A sound that was not a gunshot, not a man's voice. It was a war cry, a single, piercing cry, answered by 30 more. Dawn came not with a gentle hand, but with a blade. A sick, yellow-grey light bled over the eastern ridges, illuminating the anvil in harsh, unforgiving detail. The air was deathly still, so quiet that Janelle could hear the frantic beat of her own heart. She and Tarza had done all they could. The windows were barricaded with the cot and her small table. The mare stamped nervously, trapped inside the cabin with them, her fear a palpable, animal scent in the air. They had their weapons, they had their position, and they had perhaps 50 rounds of ammunition between them. It was, Janelle knew, hopelessly little. "They will not expect a fight," Tarza said again, his voice a low rumble in the dim light. He was at the shattered front window, peering through a narrow gap in the table he'd wedged there. "They will expect a woman, terrified." "They'll get one," Janelle muttered, pressing her cheek against the cool stock of her shotgun. She was at the firing slit on the west wall, her body rigid. The fear was a cold, solid knot in her stomach, but it was overlaid with a white-hot, clarifying anger. "But she's armed." They didn't have to wait long. The silence was broken by the distant, rhythmic drumming of hooves. It wasn't the sound of a few riders. It was the sound of a small army. They appeared as silhouettes against the jaundiced sunrise, cresting the ridge. Not just 3 or 4. Janelle counted at least 12, fanning out in a practiced, predatory half-circle to surround the small cabin, cutting off all hope of escape. Janelle's breath caught. At the back of the formation, mounted on a fine black stallion that pranced nervously, was Augustus Dryden. He was immaculate as ever, a dark blot of civilization against the raw landscape. But at the front, leading the group, was Malachi Benning. He was transformed. Gone was the settler's clothing, the cavalry jacket. He was clad in the full leather and beads of a Red Rock warrior, his face and chest covered in stark, aggressive lines of black and white paint. He was a man claiming a heritage he had intended to sell. Beside him rode 4 other warriors, similarly painted, but the bulk of the force was made of the same hard-bitten, white-faced men who had attacked the night before, their rifles held with a casual readiness. They stopped just outside of easy rifle range. For a moment, the only sound was the jingle of harnesses and the stamp of horses. "Janelle Miles!" Dryden's voice boomed, projecting an air of absolute, legal authority. "A final offer. This is a legal posse. The men you murdered last night were deputies serving a lawful warrant. Hand over the fugitive, Tarza, and you will be escorted, unharmed, to the train station in Tucson. Refuse, and you will be charged as an accomplice to murder and resisting arrest." "He lies," Taza whispered, his eye never leaving the sight of his rifle. "They were arsonists and thugs," Janelle screamed back, her voice cracking with fury. "They came to burn me out, and you know it!" A flicker of annoyance crossed Dryden's face. Before he could respond, Malachi rode his horse forward, his hand raised. He was performing for his men, for the chief he intended to be. "Taza!" he yelled, his voice carrying clearly. He shouted in his own language first, a torrent of angry, accusatory words. Then he switched to English. "Cousin, show yourself. Your fight is with me, not with this settler woman. She is nothing. Let her go, and I will give you a warrior's death." The challenge hung in the air. Janelle looked at Taza. His face was granite. Slowly, deliberately, he stood up and stepped into the open, shadowed doorway. He was unarmed, his rifle left inside, a gesture of profound contempt. He looked magnificent, his wounds and the soot from the fire only adding to his authority. "Malachi!" Taza's voice was a roar, a sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. It silenced the birds, the horses. "You are a snake. You wear the paint of our people, but you ride with the man who would poison our water and strip our sacred mountains. You are no blood of mine. You are a dog for a white man's gold." This public accusation, spoken in two languages for all to hear, struck home. The 4 warriors Malachi had brought shifted uneasily on their mounts. They looked at each other, then at Dryden's hired guns, then back at Taza, who stood alone in the doorway, the very picture of the leader he claimed to be. Malachi's authority, built on lies, was visibly cracking. Dryden saw the hesitation and panicked. This parley was not going his way. "He's a liar and a traitor to his own chief!" Dryden shrieked, his composure shattering. Take them both! I want him alive, and her! I don't care!" He raised his hand. The hired guns, loyal only to his money, leveled their rifles. Hammers clicked back. This was it. Janelle raised her own shotgun, her heart a cold stone. It was a dozen guns against 2, a hopeless, final, defiant gesture. The world narrowed to the bead at the end of her barrel, and from the ridge behind them, a new sound. It was not a gunshot. It was a single, piercing cry, a sound that ripped the sky open. It was answered instantly by 30, then 40 more. Everyone froze. Dryden's hand remained in the air. Malachi spun his horse around, his face a mask of sudden, utter disbelief. Lining the ridge that Janelle had thought was empty, the ridge she had watched all night, was a line of mounted warriors. Not a dozen, at least 50. They were in full, breathtaking ceremonial paint, their lances tipped with eagle feathers, their rifles catching the first bright, horizontal rays of the sun. They were not Malachi's small, treacherous faction. This was the true, undeniable power of the Red Rock tribe. At their center, mounted on a grey-white mare, sat an old, imposing man. His face was a map of dignity and time. He wore a magnificent war bonnet that flowed down his back and around his neck. Visible even at this distance, he wore a turquoise amulet, a mate to the one Taza carried. This was Kalen, the chief. "Father," Taza shouted, a note of fierce, terrible relief in his voice. Kalen raised his hand. The warriors began to move. They did not charge. They flowed down the hillsides like water, finding its level, a silent, disciplined tide that effortlessly surrounded the surrounders. In moments, Dryden's posse was trapped, a small, terrified island in a sea of Red Rock warriors. The hired guns threw down their rifles with a clatter. The odds were not just bad, they were impossible. Dryden himself looked apoplectic, his face slack with shock. This is a misunderstanding. I am a friend of the tribe. A friend!" Malachi's face had turned a sickly, ashen grey. He was trapped. The 4 warriors who had ridden with him, seeing their true chief and the overwhelming force of his authority, immediately dismounted, dropped their rifles, and put their faces to the dirt, a gesture of absolute surrender and shame. Kalen rode his horse forward, parting the sea of his own men, until he was face to face with his nephew. He said nothing for a full, agonizing minute. His eyes, burning with a cold fire, were the only judgment. "Malachi Benning," Kalen finally said, his voice like gravel. He used the Western name, a deep, profound insult. "You have betrayed your blood. You have allied with the snake." He gestured to Dryden. "You have attempted to murder my son. You have broken the sacred law. You are Angapi. Unperson, banished, dead to the tribe." The sentence was absolute. Malachi, seeing his entire world evaporate, let out a desperate, animal roar. In a final, suicidal spasm of defiance, he drew his pistol and aimed it, not at Tarza, but at the chief, at his father. He never fired. The crack of Tarza's rifle from the cabin doorway was deafening. The shot was not a kill. It was a judgment. Malachi's pistol spun from his grasp, his hand shattering in a spray of red. He screamed, a high, thin sound, clutching the bloody ruin. "He will not be touched by a settler's bullet," Tarza said, walking forward, his rifle smoking. He threw it to the ground and advanced on his cousin. The loyal warriors seized Malachi, pulling him from his horse, his fate now a matter for tribal law, a fate worse than a quick, clean death. Now all eyes turned to Augustus Dryden. The land baron, his hands trembling, was trying to regain his composure. "Sheriff, I demand. I am a respected citizen. This is an illegal assembly. I demand protection." "It's over, Augustus." A new voice cut through the air. Sheriff Brody, flanked by 2 new deputies, rode up from the rear. He hadn't been part of Dryden's posse. He had been following it. "One of your deputies from last night didn't die," Brody said, his voice tired but hard as he dismounted. "The one Tarsa shot. His horse carried him halfway to town before he fell. He confessed everything, Augustus. The whole damn thing. The plan to burn out Mrs. Miles, the ambush on Tarza, your deal with Malachi. All of it. In exchange for a doctor." Brody pulled a pair of iron handcuffs from his belt. "Augustus Dryden, you are under arrest for conspiracy, attempted murder, and arson." Dryden's face collapsed. The power, the arrogance, the entire edifice of his authority evaporated into the desert air. He was just a small, pale man in a suit staring at the cuffs. As the deputies seized his arms, his head snapped up, and his eyes met Janelle's. It was a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. She just stared back, her shotgun still resting, heavy and warm, in the crook of her arm. The sun was high now, a harsh, neutral observer, baking the churned dust of the devil's anvil. The air, thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the bitter smoke from the barn's smouldering skeleton, was almost completely silent. The sudden violent tension had vanished, leaving a ringing emptiness in its wake. Janelle stood near the cabin door, her shotgun still heavy in her arms, though she held it loosely now, the barrel pointed at the cracked earth. Her body was a single, profound ache. Her ears still buzzed, and the adrenaline was draining away, leaving her hands trembling. The scene before her had split into 2 distinct, grim processions. Sheriff Brody, his face a mask of grim duty, was securing Augustus Dryden. The land baron, his immaculate suit now covered in dust, was sputtering, his face a mottled purple. "This is an outrage, Brody. You are making a catastrophic mistake. I will have your badge. I will have you ruined." "Be quiet, Augustus," Brody said, his voice flat with exhaustion as he cinched the handcuffs. "The only thing you're going to have is a cell. Your man, Frank, he sang like a canary before he passed. We've got you for conspiracy, arson, and attempted murder. You're done." Dryden's eyes, wide with disbelief and pure hatred, found Janelle's. She just stared back, her face blank, offering him nothing. The other procession was quieter and far more chilling. Malachi Benning, his hand a ruined, bloody mess wrapped in a rag, was being bound by two of Kaelin's sternest warriors. He was no longer the arrogant scout or the painted pretender. He was a broken man, his face a mask of grey, abject terror. He knew his fate would not be decided by a settler's court, and there would be no mercy. His own people, the ones he had betrayed, dragged him and his few remaining followers away, their feet shuffling in the dirt, a silent parade of the damned. With the immediate threats neutralized, a space cleared. The remaining Red Rock warriors sat on their horses, a silent, powerful ring of judgment, their gaze resting on the cabin and on her. Then Kaelin, the old chief, dismounted. His movements were slow, deliberate, each one weighted with an authority that needed no words. He was a tall man, his dignity a physical presence. He handed the reins of his horse to a young warrior and began to walk toward Janelle. She tensed, her knuckles white on the shotgun. He was not an enemy, but he was not her ally. He was a force of nature, like the mountains themselves, and she was a trespasser on his land. Tarza, his rifle now slung over his back, moved to stand at his father's side, becoming a bridge between the old chief and the settler woman. He stood between them, and the three of them formed a triangle of strange, shared history. Kaelin stopped a few feet from her. His eyes, dark and incredibly sharp, took in everything. He looked at the smoking ruins of her barn. He looked at the pock-marked sod of her cabin walls, scarred by his nephew's bullets. He looked at her soot-stained face, her torn apron, and the defiant, exhausted way she held her ground. Finally, his gaze settled on the shotgun. "Father," Tarza said, his voice respectful, clear in the quiet air. He spoke in his own tongue first, a short, flowing description, then switched to English for her. "This is Janelle Miles. She pulled me from the anvil when Malachi left me for the buzzards. She gave me water. She used her last money to buy medicine in the town. She fought the men who came to burn this place. She fought by my side." Kaelin's expression did not change, but his intense gaze softened, shifting from assessment to something deeper. He saw the truth of his son's words in the landscape of ruin around her. He understood the price she had paid for this act of compassion. He nodded slowly. He reached up to his own neck, to a simpler, smaller necklace of polished turquoise and silver beads that he wore beneath his magnificent bonnet. With measured ceremonial movements, he unfastened the leather cord and held it out to her in his open palm. Janelle stared at the offering, confused. Her mind, slow and thick from the fight, couldn't process the gesture. "The white men come and take," Kaelin said, his voice a low, heavy rumble, like rocks moving in a dry riverbed. "They take the land, they take the water, they take the lives. They are a people of taking." His eyes met hers again, holding her fast. You gave. You found my son, a man who should be your enemy, and you gave him water. You gave him shelter. You saved the eye of the chieftain." He gestured to the amulet Tarza wore. "You saved my son." Janelle, her hands trembling so hard she was afraid she would drop it, slowly leaned the shotgun against the cabin wall. She wiped her blackened, calloused palm on her apron, an instinctive gesture of respect, and accepted the necklace. The stones were heavy, polished smooth by time, and cool against her burning skin. "This land," Kaelin said, making a slow, deliberate gesture that encompassed her homestead, the cracked flats, and the small hidden spring. "It is your land. The spring is your spring. The Red Rock people will honor this boundary. As long as the mountains stand, you are safe here. You are Dartis." The word was foreign, but the meaning was unmistakable. "Friend," Taza translated, his voice quiet, a hint of a smile in it. "You are Dartis, a friend of the people." Janelle looked down at the turquoise in her hand, then up at Taza, at Gideon, the man she had dragged, nursed, and fought beside. This bond, forged in blood, fire, and shared survival, transcended all the old hatreds that defined their world. He was a chief in waiting, a successor to this great man. But in her mind, he would always be the delirious man in her cot. The one who had, in his own moment of clarity, shown her how to save her garden. "Thank you," she whispered, the words thick and small in her throat. Taza nodded, a deep, final acknowledgement. His duty here was done. His path was now with his father, to return to his people, to heal the rift Malachi had torn, and to lead them into the difficult future. He mounted his horse, a proud warrior, his future certain, his place restored. He looked down at her one last time, from the saddle. There was no debt between them, no lingering obligation, just a profound, unbreakable, shared respect. "Live well, Janelle Miles," he said, his use of her full name a mark of honor. "And you, Taza," she replied, using his true name, sealing her acceptance of his world. With a silent command from Kaelin, the 50 warriors turned as one. They began to ride back toward the mountains, their forms shimmering in the heat, a river of men flowing back to their source. Janelle watched them until the last rider had vanished into the haze, and the only sound left was the wind whistling through her shattered window. She was alone again, but everything was different. She turned and looked at her home. It was scarred, but it was standing. She walked to the corral and ran a hand down her mare's neck, calming the still skittish animal. She looked at the smouldering pile of timber that had been her barn, not with a sense of loss, but as the price of her freedom. She walked back inside the cabin and finally sat down, the exhaustion hitting her like a physical blow. She clutched the turquoise necklace, its weight a solid, tangible thing. For the first time since Peter died, she did not feel like an outcast. She wasn't the widow of the anvil, a half-mad hermit clinging to a useless patch of dirt. She was Janelle Miles, the woman who had saved a chief. She was Dartise, a friend of the people. And Augustus Dryden, the man who owned the town, was in chains. The desert, she thought, finally letting her eyes close, had its own strange and terrible justice. Janelle Miles watched the dust settle, the heavy turquoise necklace a symbol of the new world she now inhabited. The man she knew as Gideon, the leader known as Taza, had changed her life as much as she had saved his. Her small, scarred cabin was no longer a place of isolation, but a fortress of proven strength. The desert was still harsh, but it was no longer empty. She had faced down corporate greed, tribal betrayal, and her own profound loneliness, and had forged an alliance built on a single, defiant act of compassion. Her story proves that even in the most brutal of lands, the bravest acts are not those of violence, but of humanity. And that karma in the Old West always finds its mark. If this story of survival, betrayal, and unexpected destiny resonated with you, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a powerful story, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more true life dramas every week. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.